Hi there, everyone. My name is Carol Howe, and I'm so happy to be with you today.
Hi, my name is Evette, and thank you so much for joining us.
We're very excited to come together. We've had an interesting time connecting, and we've loved it. We're old friends now. So, in any event, from the time I was a little girl, my big interest was what's missing, what makes life work. And that was always the centerpiece of my life for a long time. And I explored many things. 40 years ago, I came across a material called A Course in Miracles. I read the first page and knew this is my path from now on. So I have spent the past 40 years practicing, learning, teaching, building, videoing, writing, counseling, business consulting, everything imaginable based on these marvelous universal principles. And it's my great delight to be able to talk about that a little bit today.
Wonderful. That was a beautiful introduction, Carol. I feel like I know you now. Right. So everyone, my name is Evette Rose. I'm the author of Metaphysical Anatomy, Volume 1 and 2, and a few other books. And I got into the personal development world as most of us, there's something in our lives that's just not working for us. And, I really wanted to find the root cause of it, but it's hard to find the root cause of it if you don't have the awareness of that. So I spent many years looking for tools to help me to wake up my level of awareness to what it is that was holding me back. And with trial and error, as I'm sure you can relate to, with our journey.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I finally found what was working for me. And ultimately what I found what was working for me was my own answers to what I was learning to. It was applying the tools that I learned in a way that resonated with me and letting go of control of the process. So that's in really, really, in short, that's who I am. And I got into the personal development world as well, even more deeper, because I loved the changes that I saw in myself. And I wanted to share that with you, with the world, with everyone that was receptive to it, and anyone who wanted to listen. I was right there and ready to connect and to share everything that I knew. So, and I'm still doing that to this day.
Yeah. Well, obviously we are sisters in that regard. It's like, yes. We're going to get this information out there one way or the other to those who are asking for it. I'm sure you join me in feeling like being evangelical is not what we're interested in. In other words, it's like trying to convince someone that you need to change your mind is pointless. But for anybody who wants to and says, I need a helping hand, where do I start? What is this all about? Then we're a perfect match.
That's where we show up. And that's where we show up in the strongest form, actually, because that's also where our alignment is. So where your alignment is, that's where you're going to stand the strongest.
Absolutely.
Effortlessly.
Well, one of the main area that is the focus of A Course in Miracles is healing through relationships. And that means healing every aspect of our lives, whether that's physical healing, mental healing, financial healing, relationship healing, whatever. It's like everything boils down to the kind of healing that can be fast-tracked through recognizing what our relationships are about. A Course in Miracles is a teaching in non-duality, and without going into a great deal of explanation about what that means, it means that we are far more than we imagine at this point. And we bring into this world some core woundedness, and then we add to that unwittingly. And our relationships are going to reveal to us what we're here to heal. And as that attitude, as the beliefs, as the notions about ourselves that aren't true heal, then everything else heals as a result of that. So if you like, we can talk a little bit about how to handle our relationships, why they don't work, that sort of thing, and how they all conspire to lead to our healing.
Right.
Does that sound like a good idea?
I love it. I love it. And I think for me, what I noticed and what I learned from my own experiences with relationships was that my outer relationships reflected my relationship with myself.
Always.
Everyone kept telling me that, but I couldn't see it. I'm like, well, no, I go to the salon, I do my nails, I do this, I do that. But then I realized it was me focusing on the exterior experience of my life rather than the internal processing, because that's where the pain is. That's where the self-loathing is. That's where the low self-esteem is. So, and as a result of that, I was so focused on the outer world thinking, no, I'm doing everything right. Why is all this happening to me?
Yes.
I realized that the deeper I had to dive into me, into Evette, the core essence of who I am, that the more I started feeling the pain, and the moment it feels comfortable, we move away from that. We look for distractions. So ultimately, the more we distract ourselves from that, the more we're going to have people and circumstances in our lives to actually show us, this is how broken your relationship is with yourself. Look at the people and the dynamics and the friendships, and especially, intimate relationships that you are attracting, because they are there for a reason.
I always am fond of saying something that's very similar, which is other people treat you or seem to treat you like you treat yourself.
Absolutely.
In other words, they're going to give you the most valuable diagnostic material that you could possibly look for. And you're exactly right. For a lot of people, and we'll talk about this some later, relationships are addictions. Because of the drama, the busyness, the everything we get all tangled up in. And what that does is mask an even deeper, more existential pain. You might say, well, my relationships are painful. It's like, yes, but there's an even deeper pain related to guilt and so on and so forth that is masked by, shall we say, the superficial level of drama. I remember interviewing somebody for a book years ago who was in an abusive relationship, and she said, I realized that I knew exactly how to trigger him to get to be violent. And then I could just go like, what? I'm now this victim. But she said, I knew what I was doing. I knew that this kind of drama was an escape from something that was even deeper.
Absolutely. And then, and adding to what you just said, it's also about, it begs the question, what was her associations for love? Did love equal violence? Did love equal abuse? Did love equal rejection? Because ultimately that's also the childhood patterns that keeps playing out. Because if a child's need for love was met by violence every time when the only thing that they wanted was love, and that pattern's repeated enough, it gets anchored into the unconscious mind. And even though computation neurons here tells you, no, that's wrong, the unconscious mind goes like, well, that's fine. Well, I'm going to go revert back to what I'm familiar with. And that's where we learn to feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because we revert back to what we feel comfortable with.
And I think it's helpful for everybody to have like the 25 words or less version of how that happens. First of all, we now know that we inherit some of our fear and some of our guilt just via DNA. In other words, our ancestral lines, all those people weren't healed yet, so we inherit some of their lack of healing. And then while we are in utero, before we're even born, all of the sensory data, the thought processes, the energy fields, everything that's going on around us is downloading into, to keep it simple, we will call it our consciousness, at an astounding rate of 20 million units of information per second. Well, you can imagine with no filtering, because the neocortex hasn't even started to develop yet, everything is downloading. It's the way the enculturation process works. So by the time we're born, we have some of our, let's just call them major core wounds, are in place. And then we become little babies and toddlers and so on. And when we're little and we have no verbal skills and we have no sense of self-talk or anything like that, when we're hurt, whether we're emotionally hurt or painfully or emotionally or physically in pain, we're going to try to escape from pain and go toward what feels better. So we begin to, first of all, let's say we express our pain by screaming and yelling or carrying on because we have no other options at that point. And then if the response we get is that we're punished, we're abandoned, we're sent to the room, something happens, then we begin to equate self-expression in general with, this is dangerous, don't do that. And in those first 7 years, we develop so many of our physical defenses. The breathing becomes shallow because deep breathing allows more of a feeling to occur. So it's like, well, then let's not do that. And it's automatic. Muscles become tight. And then in our earlier years, or our middle years, we've got emotional defenses that we've been. So we're arming ourselves. We're building a stronger and stronger and stronger fortress. We then have our intellectual defenses. And by the time the neocortex is developed, which is about 40% of the brain, which allows us to be adult, it's the executive functioning of the brain. It's what allows us to enjoy, we can enjoy many things, but we also have delayed gratification. We know how to handle ourselves. So we're about 23 or 4 years old before that's complete. That's the last part of the body to be fully developed. And so by that time, we don't question all of the need for defenses because we're trying in all of our early years to stay safe. Staying safe is the bottom line.
Absolutely.
And we never question, once we get to be young adults, we don't go, oh, I wonder if everything that I've learned in my growing up years is false. It's like, much of it is, but we don't think that way. It never occurs to us. Now, what we've learned is a lot of coping skills. Like, what do I have to do to stay safe? What do I have to do so that nobody knows who I really am? All of we build this terribly small version of what we really are, and it feels terrible. And then we build defenses to try to deal with my pain, not let anybody cause any more pain, and so on, so that the whole focus of our attention is now on trying to stay safe. What do I have to do to make it in the world, rather than being present, being fully who we are, being the expressions of love that we are. So we've got lots of, not so much learning as unlearning to do.
Exactly. And exactly with that unlearning, it's also about unlearning the old coping mechanisms that served in the childhood. Because what happens is emotionally we mature. In most cases, most people we mature, but the coping strategies and mechanisms does not mature with us. So what happens is, you have this adult that keeps reverting back to this childlike coping mechanisms, strategies that ultimately ends up sabotaging the goals or the dreams or the lifestyle that it is that they're trying to create, including relationships.
Yes, and the reason why that early programming always wins. There's a part of us that knows I shouldn't be doing this, but I am. It's because the primal survival mechanism always takes priority. In other words, whatever it is I have to do to stay safe and stay alive is like, okay, that's going to win over, this would be a nice thing to do for this person over here.
Because biologically, that's the primary purpose of the body. That's to keep you alive. But it's also about having the awareness of how to manage the body and to make sure that it's almost like the body merges with the spirit and the soul and the intellectual aspect of our life, so that it's in alignment. Because for most people, it's out of alignment.
And you see, what happens is we're so unaware of this maturation process and all that drives us, if you will, because everybody else seems to be doing the same things. Like, what's to look at? What's to examine? This is just how life is. And so much of our pain and so much of our distress gets shoved under the rug. And it undermines the quality of our lives. It undermines our peace of mind. It undermines our health. It undermines absolutely everything. And we don't know why. We keep trying to, like, if I had more of this and less of this and I lived somewhere else and so on, that would fix the restlessness. It would fix the pain. It would fix the loneliness. It would fix everything else. Only, of course, it doesn't. So here's where relationships come to the rescue, so to speak, because if we're operating if we're operating from a mostly unconscious place, and where so much of our pain and guilt is really not known to us. We think, what? I remember the first time I read through A Course in Miracles or Time or Two, and it talked about all that guilt. I thought, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't feel guilty. It's like, oh, well, I was just so ignorant of the whole process. And I'd been studying a lot of stuff for a long time, but still, this I was not aware of.
Yeah,
but relationships will hit those core wounds.
Yes.
And you see, we're drawn together in relationships, as you have already very accurately noted, because we're on the same wavelength and we actually have some similar wounds that need to be healed. It's kind of like why we're on the same wavelength. And so we're brought in for, we'll just call them worldly or superficial reasons. I don't mean superficial in any sort of a dismissive way. It's just that it's for reasons of form for the most part. And then you hear people say, I don't know what happened. This isn't the person I married. What's gone wrong? It's like, because shortly after we get involved, we start projecting our own unfinished business onto the other person. Exactly. We start seeing in them what we don't like about ourselves, but it's not known to us. In other words, it's being projected from an unconsciousness in us. Yeah. And it sure looks like it's that other person that's being the problem, not realizing they're standing there like a mirror, like the most faithful, accurate mirror of, this is what's going on with you. This is what you blame yourself for. This is where your pain is coming from. It's all an internal process. But the universe has the most magical way of bringing the perfect mirrors into our lives. And different people will come into our lives at different times because there are different aspects of us that need to be healed. Different defenses released, so that the full, shall we say, power and glory and loving presence of all of us can come out and play. Because as long as I'm busy defending, trying to keep myself from being hurt, I'm also preventing myself from being present.
Absolutely. And it's like you're living in that dual reality. But and also, having said that, people walk into relationships with their own set of values, with their own agendas as well. I want, but
yes.
in most cases, there's a lack of compromise as well, because that stubbornness, that rigidity, that's their defense mechanism of, this is what I want, but I'm not going to change or hear what it is that you want to say, because if I do, then I'm going to have to go look within, and I don't want to do that. You're pushing me out of my comfort zone. So, in most cases as well, that's also why people sabotage relationships, because when they are pushed a little bit too hard to take that journey within, they go, not going there. I'm not going inside. If I can't fix my external, if I can't take in a nice holiday, if you don't like that, you don't appreciate me, but I'm not going to go dive deep in here for you, because I'm not ready for that.
Absolutely. And you see, even the ideas now that seem so familiar and comfortable to us who have been at this a long time, like staying in your comfort zone, it's like, people don't even realize that we have established a comfort zone. You just know all of a sudden something's not right and it must be your fault, is about as sophisticated as we get about that. But it is absolutely, you're so right. It's like we end up like two half-filled glasses of water. Like, I'm keeping my half, but I want to fill up some from yours. It's like, well, that isn't going to happen when you've got two people who will not compromise about giving up their half-filled glasses of water. I just would like some of yours. You could see the impossibility of that situation.
Like eating out of the other one's plate, but you're not allowed to touch my plate.
Yes. It's like, oh, this is so nuts. And so you're so right. We go into relationships unaware of the process. We have no awareness at all that we're being brought in for a healing purpose. We think, I'm being brought in for the purpose of, this looks like the person who's going to help me get my way.
I know, and exactly going on exactly where you said that. I'm going to use actually my previous marriage as a good example that only lasted 5 years. And it's funny because we can actually, my ex-husband and I, we can actually laugh about it, because when we figured it out, we laughed because it was just funny, because we had the awareness to understand it and then actually take the tools that we had to heal it. And what happened was that we both actually came together based on the very rocky foundation, which was actually for all the wrong reasons. I was looking for an escape, trying to get away, and he was looking for someone to save. So it was a perfect match. It worked really well. But when I came to a place where I've grown and matured, where I didn't need to be saved anymore, and he didn't feel like rescue, and he realized, well, he doesn't need to rescue me anymore because the event's doing okay now, the attraction went away and everything just collapsed. And when we figured that out, we were sitting and we go like, oh my God. So he had to look at the need. Why does he have the need to rescue? Where does he find his self-worth and value in that? Absolutely. And I had to look at what resources within me was missing, that I felt that I needed someone else to help me to get back on my feet and to feel safe again, whereas I'm the one that's responsible for that. So it was just, we had such a big, we laughed about it. It was funny.
And you know, it's interesting that as you go through life, and since I have gone through some considerably more of my life than you have, you find that you might end up in a relationship with somebody at some point and you go, I have never had to deal with anybody like this before. And it's like, well, that's because we've been busy healing other things before. And it's like, now this one moves to the top of the agenda. I had a relationship with a man. I was married for a long time. And then it was very clear it was time not to be married anymore, not because it was an acrimonious, difficult thing. It was like, it felt totally flat. I could tell all the energy had gone out of it because its purpose was over. We had raised our children, and I have adorable, beautiful boys that I love more than just anything in the world. And so that was all exactly right. But I was very aware of feeling like I can see the things that I projected onto him, and those were healed. I had dealt with those. I had reclaimed those as my own and had done something about it and that sort of thing. So then fast forward some time, and I had a partner for a while who was unlike anyone I had ever been with before, in that he had an ability to be offensive to people. And when I grew up as a good Southern girl, the worst thing you could ever do would be to offend anybody. Right. And he seemed to be able to offend people and not have any idea he was offending people. And we talked it up to the fact that he was born in New York and I was born in the South, you know, and those cultural things. And there's a tiny little bit to that, but that was beside the point. It's that in speaking of these early defenses that we build in, one of the earliest lessons that I learned in my particular growing up, and my parents weren't terrible parents, they were just completely unaware about how to raise children, as a great many parents, you know, are unaware. And it was like the worst crime of all that could get you into the most trouble was offending people or hurting somebody's feelings. It was like, your feelings could be hurt, okay, but just make sure you don't hurt anyone else's. And those things are modeled for us. It's not like somebody gives us a big lecture, although I did have that stated to me as well, but it blocks so much of us. If we walk around thinking, job one is to make sure I don't offend anybody, then you can't ask for what you want, you can't tell the truth, you can't be real. I mean, there are so many downsides to believing from your truth. You can't ever offend anybody. So it was absolutely, since this was, I would call one of my most basic core issues to deal with in this lifetime. So nothing could be more perfect than have somebody in my life that sometimes I would just feel like, how can you say that? Or how can you do it? Was not, he didn't do anything terrible. It just felt so different and it touched all of those places that you weren't allowed to touch, so to speak. And it was one of the most marvelous, important learning experiences of my life to get past the programming of rule number one is never offend anybody, so that rule number one could be follow your intuition, tell the truth, let your defenses down. Don't presume that other people are the enemy, who are going to get you if you're offensive or something like that. So it's important for people to know, it's like your relationship with your children, if you have any, is for one reason. For this kind of a partner, for a next door neighbor, for a business partner. It's like they're all meant to be. They are all so tailor-made for us. We are so loved and so cared for and so looked out for that we are drawn to and supported while we look deeply into those areas that we've been too scared to even acknowledge were there.
Right. Absolutely. And it's interesting because what I'm hearing with him as well is that his way of communication was through provocation. Like he didn't clearly that was just his language for expressing himself.
And I also found out later, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me much earlier, is that he really actually found out after we were no longer together that he does have a kind of form of autism. He has that inability to socially connect with people. So it's not like he was doing this to drive me crazy, but what could be better for my letting go than somebody who was not even capable of social connection that is so at the ground of relationships that are healthy. So it was like such a blessing. I even knew while it was going on that it was a blessing. Some of the things I didn't like because I had to deal with what I had to deal with, but I was far enough along into this to realize this is a gift. This is not an enemy. In fact, he used to say, because he was a very wise person as well, he used to say, our relationships, speaking of relationships in general, our relationships fit us like tailor-made Hong Kong suits in terms of how exactly the right things come together. So in any event, if we could realize, and nobody does this perfectly, nobody does it right in the beginning, but if we could be brave enough to say, the issues that we have with one another are not ever about the facts. Like, why won't you take out the garbage? This person will never take out the garbage. I tell them over and over and over and over again to take out the, not about the garbage. It's that feeling of being not listened to. It's the sense of not being okay. It's the feeling of their feelings are being dismissed or whatever. So I've done so much, and I'm sure you have too, relationship counseling. You see the same problem over and over and over and over and over and over. There's not like there's a whole bunch of different problems. There's the issues are never the event. The issues are always the feelings that are elicited by the whatever happens. You know, whether you go to Home Depot and you're trying to find a light fixture, you know, and there gets to be an issue about it. It's not about the light fixture. It's about feeling dismissed, feeling not listened to over and over and over again. So our task as human beings is to realize, if we could, once we realize we're upset, once we realize that we're triggered by something, once we realize there's distress now brought up into my conscious awareness, it's been sitting in my unconscious, it's been brought into conscious awareness. So if we could learn, and this is just so valuable, important, rather than you weren't nice to me, or, you know, that kind of finger pointing you kind of pronoun, to stick with, I feel really hurt.
Right.
I feel
That you
not listened to.
Because ultimately it's about how you respond to it.
Absolutely. So if what I deal with people all the time is like, okay, let's practice this when they come together. Mm-hmm. And if I say to somebody, I feel really like I don't count. You're not accusing someone else. And when someone is not accused or made wrong, they can be listening. But the minute you go, you are the problem, it's like up cup their defenses. Communication is stopped. You might as well stop talking because nobody's going to hear a thing.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how available we can be when we say, I really have my feelings hurt. And you're not pointing a finger. And if somebody then has the presence of mind to say, I'm really sorry, like what happened kind of thing, if you can speak of the what happened in the third person, not like you didn't pay any attention to me at Home Depot when we were looking at chandeliers, but making reference to the incident in the third person, kind of like when we were discussing at Home Depot. See, that's just pointing to it. There's no wrong making being made at this point. You're owning your own experience. Like when we had this discussion, I realized I felt very left out or whatever.
Absolutely, but it's also about the art of communication and going into a problematic situation with the intention to be part of the solution rather than continuing the problem. And that's a conscious decision that you have to make when you argue with your partner or when there's a disagreement. How am I going to approach this? Am I going to approach this with the intention to create a solution, or am I going to continue being part of the problem and just throw more fuel and gas into this fire?
Oh, and it's so important. That's a beautiful way to say it, to be solution-oriented rather than problem-oriented, because
you get triggered. So you want to fuel it, but it's about acknowledging the trigger and feeling, okay, you know what? It's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel not okay, because the anger gets fueled even more because we make ourselves wrong for the way that we respond. So ultimately accept that you're angry, accept that you're, a little bit grumpy about what just happened, but also then evaluate the emotions, breathe through it, and then go, you know what? How can I correct this? How can I be part of the solution? That's what I always say to people. And it's a big awakening and awareness to that, including for myself.
And a way that also puts language around your very excellent way of delineating this is either problem or solution oriented, is that when we come into a relationship in order to get our way, which everybody does in the beginning, especially in the younger years, we've got two different goals for this one single relationship. It's like, how's that going to work? Not at all. But if we could establish a single goal of our mutual healing for this relationship, then you automatically find yourself in that solution place. You find yourself able to listen, because you begin to realize not only this is a fellow human being, I want to be of assistance simply to a fellow human being. I want to learn to take responsibility for my own emotional state, because no one causes my emotional state except my own body chemistry.
Absolutely. And one thing that, and to help manage that, I find that, and again, with the art of communication, that's why I love the way that you communicate so beautifully, Carol, because you take all these complicated concepts and you just go boom and you just break it down to something so simple. And it's also about two people coming together and looking at, okay, so what's your values for love? What is your thresholds for love? What is your boundaries in love? And then the other person needs to reciprocate and share what theirs are. And then also, what is your boundaries in terms of your free time? What is your boundaries in terms of what you want this relationship to look and be like? And communicate that openly. And when there's a mismatch, find a middle ground and compromise to meet each other halfway, instead of trying to selfishly fight to have your needs met. Because ultimately what I find with most people is, I will be happy when I have this. I will only be happy when I have that. But okay, so now you're working so hard towards this one thing that you're fighting for, and you finally have it, but then you have it and it's that 1 minute of instant gratification, and then you look for the next thing to be happy about. So it's almost like in a way that self-sabotaging cycle keeps rolling over. And that's why it's so incredibly important bottleneck it, just bottleneck it, open communication channels. But unfortunately, most of us have very negative associations with communication. Communication equals confrontation, asking for my needs met equals projection. So it's also, and then of course, we're going to attract most likely a partner that's going to have really harsh communication skills. And I think that's also why you've learned to become such a beautiful communicator that you are with this partner that you had this experience with him offending people so quickly, and you having to learn how to communicate, and breaking things down is quite complex, quite simple, so that the person on the receiving end can hear what you're saying, because most people listen to respond, they don't listen to learn.
Exactly. And another thing, as we keep learning through life, because of the filming I've done for the past 6 years, we have a wonderful program that's called See How Life Works. That I'm taking 50 years of information and we're going to make it available. So we've got a wonderful online program that does that. And I have collaborated with a wonderful young filmmaker, and he's an introvert. I'm an extrovert, which probably is no surprise. And I have never had a close relationship with an introvert before. It was like, I thought I knew about introverts and extroverts, and I know the basics, you either get energy or energy is drained by being with people, but there's so many other things as well. I learned things about the way extroverts operate that I hadn't known. I knew I operated a certain way, but I didn't know what the counterpart on the introvert side was like. So it was marvelous for us to be able to so we both do that meeting in the middle. In other words, he recognizes my extrovert kind of way of being. I recognize his introvert way of being. Right. And just because we adore each other and we're so grateful and appreciative of one another, we will do anything we need to do to keep everything whole, to keep everything honest, to keep everything cleaned out so that stuff doesn't get stuck and can sabotage our work, because we think our work is too important to let personal stuff get in the way. So you never ever run out of opportunities to learn new things about yourself and how to communicate and how other people operate, so to speak.
And that's a beautiful example of having a collective goal that you share and being willing to optimize and to work towards that goal to make it more, to make it effortless.
And there's another thing too, and this gets possibly a little bit into quantum physics. Don't worry, we're not going to talk about quantum physics, but at least it's the sciences do agree with the non-dual teachings, which have come down the pike for at least the past 5,000 years or so. And that is, so what we do is keep our defenses in place, the things that we've learned based on past experience. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, we don't allow for something different to happen right now. And what the new biology, as well as quantum physics, will kind of concur with is that the moment an experience is over, it's like it dissolves back into probabilities. We act like our past is like a whole bunch of books on a shelf, and I can go back and I'm going to pull out what happened when I was 15 years old and somebody forgot to pick me up at the ball game or something like that, and look at that and then put it back on the shelf. It's like, that's not what happens. It's like our past is constantly dissolving behind us, so that the grounds for our guilt, which is of course the source of our pain, is unwarranted, because every new moment is a clean moment. It doesn't matter how good things have been, how bad things have been. If my goal today is my peace of mind, and my peace of mind requires that I be as faithful and as kind and as open-hearted and as loving to whoever is in front of me at this moment as possible. And I can't do that if I drag along really, at this point, an imaginary past. It's not there. I just keep making it up every time I decide to think about it. It's like, wow, well, that's good news, because the rationale for letting go of our guilt. See, our guilt calls for punishment.
Exactly.
Mistakes call for correction.
But the guilt's also there because we were made to feel shameful for having needs in the first place, and it's our birthright to have needs.
Yes, and it's because we learned when we had no choice but to be in that enculturation process by parents and adults and educational systems and religious systems and political systems that had no idea what was going on. We've been immersed in flat earth thinking. In other words, if you really think the world is flat and you're going to fall off and the dragons are going to get you, on the edge of the earth, you're going to operate accordingly. You're not going out just so far because you're going to fall off the edge. And so we are the only thing we're victims of is our inaccurate programming. This is not a matter of fault. It's not a matter of guilt. We haven't known what we were doing. It's a matter of, if we want to be peaceful, we do have to learn how life actually operates instead of the stories we've made up about how it operates.
Right. But that's also because that's the body's coping mechanism, because it normally doesn't understand the difference between a perceived threat and a real threat. So it's all about calming down that reptilian brain and saying,
yes,
the threat's not there anymore.
And thank you for saying that. The idea that we need to calm down our emotional state.
Yeah.
One of the big mistakes that we make in relationships that prevents our continued deepening and healing is we make statements like, you make me so mad, or you make me
right? Yeah.
And it's like, nobody makes us feel anything. The 25 words or less version of what happens is, speaking of a threat. That was very good that you said that, because that is always the problem. The threats that we presume, that we've learned to presume, are there waiting, that I have to guard against. And those defenses will create the very thing that I'm trying to avoid. But what happens is that we've learned, and we have all learned, so many false things about ourselves, whether it's we're not worthy, we're not deserving, we don't measure up. If anybody really knew me, they wouldn't like me. It's amazing the number of people I'm sure you and I have both talked to. It all reduces down to about 8 things that people say over and over and over again about what they fear. It's like,
manual.
We're so alike. Well, when I believe that, when I go into my daily life feeling nobody really likes me, or if I don't really deserve what those people deserve, those thoughts are threatening thoughts to the ego sense of personal self.
Absolutely.
And we really all, of course, know that the stress response was built in evolutionary stages to protect us physically. If a lion is about to jump off the branch and get us, we have a system built in to try to stop all the functioning that doesn't need to be functioning, send all the energy, all of the blood flow and so on to the arms and legs so that you can either run away or fight the lion. Well, the ego mind sense of personal self has hijacked that system. The ego mind, or a physical threat. In other words, it's a threat to think I'm not as good as somebody else.
Yeah.
And the brain doesn't know the difference between those two types of threats.
Right.
It responds by dumping a bunch of high-powered chemicals into the blood system. You turn off the frontal lobe of the brain, because after all, if you're about to escape from an animal, you don't need to be thinking, you don't need to be remembering, you don't need to be digesting food, you don't need to be doing long-term cell maintenance. There's a whole lot of stuff you don't need to be doing. You need to be staying alive.
Right.
Guess what? When we think these thoughts about not being okay, or not being loved, or being an unnecessary item on the planet, so to speak, the brain does the same thing. And the chemicals that are dumped into the body are taken up via receptor sites into the cells. That, do please everybody listen, is what causes our emotional state. Our anger, our fear, our grief, our distress, our upset of all kinds is what I have done to my body chemistry. No one else gets to get inside there and mess with my brain or mess with my body chemistry. Right. And that's why ownership of our emotional states are so important, because nobody can create them but ourselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think also it's about, and taking exactly from where you left that, it's also about looking at the emotional inner resources that is suppressed. It's not even missing in you because it's there. It's just suppressed. But looking at the emotional inner resources that you did not access at that time, that caused you to feel the need to use the anger to lash out and set a boundary. Because ultimately, when you look at the deeper root cause of anger, it's feeling powerless. And when we feel powerless, we feel unsafe. And when we feel unsafe,
absolutely,
the tactics that used to work for us in the past, or what we copied and observed from other people or our parents, and we'll revert to those strategies and try to regain control of the situation that we perceive as being out of control. Because ultimately, no one likes being out of control. Whether you're a peacekeeper, passive, whatever, you would describe yourself, an introvert, it doesn't matter. No one likes the feeling of being out of control.
Exactly.
Which ultimately is lack of trust. It's lack of trust in yourself. Yes. And it's that distorted relationship that's completely defragmented within ourselves.
Exactly. So you might say, we've got to reverse engineer this.
Right.
That's the fun. Is with our emotional state. Yeah. And here is the dilemma of humankind. It's like, in a nutshell, we haven't realized how our thoughts that are too small, our own self-attack, our own self-condemnation thoughts, are the cause of my distress in the first place. My anger, my grief, my upset, my fear, whatever it may be, all variations on the same theme. Then, so we didn't know that. We thought that was somebody else. Then the second thing is, and everybody has learned this as part of our coping strategies and so on, not to feel the very feelings we ourselves have created through our body chemistry. And that's why we run to our addictions, we run to our distractions, we run to our blame, we run to everything. And if we would, this can be said, I hope, very simply, so that people can get a new take on this, that what we're doing now is turning our emotional state into the enemy. In other words, we hate it. We want to look the other way. We want to disown it. We want to say nice people don't feel this way, all that sort of thing.
But just what you just said there, also, it becomes an identity.
Yes, yes.
The victim becomes an identity. I can't have what I want, becomes an identity. So I just wanted to throw that in there while you were right there, because it was perfect.
Yes, it's like I'm a victim, and this is what I'm a victim of, kind of thing. And so that we're really only a victim of our own programming, which is our job to fix. But in any event, the first step is, I can tell you, I can talk to 100 people, and for the most part, out of 100 random people, all 100 have this incorrect. In other words, everybody is fighting culturally. It's like, never let them see you sweat. Don't let anybody know what you're feeling. It's like, we treat our emotional state like a stepchild, like an enemy, like it means we're not okay, like it's going to make things worse. We have just got the worst list of stories that we have bought into about our own emotional nature. And so what happens is, when we make it the enemy, when we refuse to own it, we're telling the brain, I'm in more danger. In other words, if I'm making my emotional state the enemy, the brain goes, okay, we got another enemy. Here's more stress hormones dumped into the body. And what I'm doing is increasing my distress, rather than allowing it to dissipate. So here is a solution. Everybody, please try this. If you will go in the midst of your upset, you allow yourself to be upset. You cut away the stories of who did it, why is it this way, is it true, is it not, when's this going to be over with, whose fault is it? You stop the thinking. The thinking is the problem at this moment, and you kind of open your heart, you open your mind, you open your arms in a welcoming way to your emotional state. The reason for that isn't just arbitrary. When you have, you might say, a kindly approach to your own emotional state, you're telling the brain, no enemy, no problem, all is well. It goes, okay. It immediately, it replaces a lot of those stress hormones with the kind of body chemistry that allows you to feel just fine, that allows peace to return.
It's also about acceptance of how you feel. It's okay to be not okay.
Yes, but everybody has been taught. It must be, because I wrote a book about it, actually, Healing the Hurt Behind Addictions, because
right.
If you just stopped somebody on the street and you said, I'm doing a little survey, do you think it's okay to feel how you feel? They go, what? No, if they've even thought about it at all. And so we haven't realized we are unwittingly throwing gasoline on the fire by our approach to our emotional state. And once we learn, I need to regulate my emotions. No one else can. Nobody else can get in there and mess with my body chemistry but me. And this is, if we allow our relationships to be that sanctuary, and it doesn't matter if it can be long-term relationships or the next door neighbors. It's like, if everything can be seen as a place of, I want healing to be the purpose.
And also that you're not powerless to anything that's happening to you. It's an experience, and how you interpret that is what's going to
absolutely, absolutely. And you think
quality of it, yeah.
And you begin to change the whole purpose for all relationships. It can be, because I was in a Target store not long ago, trying to find the tracker for a kind of a fancy little Fitbit bracelet that one of my kids gave me for Mother's Day. He thought it was a whole package thing, that the tracker was inside it. He didn't realize it was only you might say, the jewelry piece or something like that. So I'd gone to several places and couldn't find what I was looking for. So at about the fifth place, I was in this Target store. And by this time, I knew where the electronics section was. So I walked back toward it, and there were three guys back there. And because this is just second nature now, this is not like a big planned event. It's like, I always just want to have a wonderful time with clerks in stores, or the guys at the post office, or the people anywhere, it doesn't matter if you'll ever see them again. And so I walked back to this counter and I said, I am so glad to see you. The last Target store I was in, there was not one employee in the entire store, much less in the electronics store. And so thank you for being here. And one guy I had seen in a Walmart store across the street where I had just been unsuccessfully. And it turns out he was not an employee. He was a Verizon guy who was making his rounds, and a sweet guy. And he looked at me and he said, weren't you just at the Walmart store? And I said, I was. You can see I am following you around. Where are you going next? And it was like that, the desire for whoever I'm with to know they're being noticed, they're being cared for, they're being listened to, they're important. There's nothing more fun in the world. I mean, it's just as much fun to go spend 15 minutes with three guys in the Target store, running an errand, as it is, with what we would consider the more historically important relationships.
Right.
All of our relationships are important. Whatever relationship is in front of us is the one where we can bring peace to ourselves and to them, if that's what we want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
it's
fun.
And as fun as relationships can be, they can actually also become an addiction. They can become a way that we use to continuously deflect. It's almost like it's just another form of alcohol. It's another form of
Yes.
drug. It's another form of, doing something excessively to use it as to avoid what the real true core pain that's happening.
You are so right. It's like the drama of relationship or the busy.
But it can also bring the opposite if you're not ready to take that leap of faith to really truly dive deep within and meet yourself, meet your true authentic self, instead of reflecting and creating this external facade and personality that you end up feeling like, I'm so disconnected from myself, I don't even know who I am. Well, hello. You're not going to know who you are if you've been making friends with this external little personality outside of you that's something that you want to be, but it's not even a reflection even near of what you really truly are. And then people wonder why they become depressed, why they start hiding, why they feel they can't relate to people. It's because you can't relate to yourself.
That's it. And that's a beautiful thing to say, because in most of our relationships, we think too much. Thinking is an addiction as well.
Gosh.
It's like, because you can be experiencing or you can be thinking.
Right.
And we don't allow ourselves to really experience our relationships, whether the ones with people you'll never see again or ones you see every day. It's like our peace of mind and our sense of delight in living is not in, as you said so accurately in the beginning, we're trying to make it right out here, have the right house, the right partner, the right amount of money, the right whatever, all out. And everybody pursues that only to find, sure enough, that doesn't work. It's like, I remember clients who've said, I thought when I made my first $1 million, that would do it. Only it didn't. I felt exactly the same. Well, maybe it's $5 million. It's like, maybe my goal was too low. It's like, no, I can only feel at peace when I allow myself to have a lovely, loving, and healing relationship with me.
Exactly.
With myself.
That's where your happiness is, because everyone's looking for it outside of themselves. And that's fun. Good luck. That's why the happiness doesn't last.
Yes. See, right now at this moment,
it can be experienced, but it's ultimately a state of mind. I mean, once I spoke to a prisoner that was on death row, and he said that, and I asked him, how do you cope sitting in such a small cell? And he said, Evette, you know what? It's not about how small the cell is. It's about my state of mind. And inside, I feel free. I don't feel trapped. And I sat there and I nearly fell off my chair.
Yes.
Hear that coming from him in his situation.
Yes. For another time, I can tell you a story about a fella who just passed away a few months ago, who had an amazing, amazing inside of prison experience too. That's it's a huge, amazing story. But our sense of peace comes from learning to let our defenses down, learning to just, when all else fails, tell the truth about who we are. By telling the truth, I don't mean I'm going to tell you everything that happened to me in my whole life. It's like telling the truth is being real right now, without our defenses. And it's the only place that my peace and my happiness can come from, because that's what keeps my stress response turned off.
Right.
And what I'm left with then is feeling delighted. It's like, I have loved our time together and with whoever is listening. It's like, right now at this moment, there are a lot of people in my life. There are a lot of people in your life. There are a lot of people in the lives of our listeners. But right now, you're the important one.
You are your purpose.
Yes. You speaking to whoever's listening is now the most important thing in my life. In other words, whatever happened before, whatever happened afterwards is whatever. But right now, our coming together with the purpose of our joint peace of mind. I so want that for all of you. And,
absolutely.
And in that wanting it for you, I experience it myself. Because one of the great laws of life is we experience what we offer to others. Oh dear, when we don't know that, we get ourselves into a great deal of trouble, worthy of another conversation someplace. But our relationships are such barometers of our state of mind, and they can be the sanctuaries of such healing and such moving forward if we just have the right information and the right tools and the willingness to realize I am responsible for the quality of my life, because I am responsible ultimately for my thoughts. And you might say, no, everybody did it to me. Well, everybody was a co-conspirator, let's just put it that way. But now I'm an adult. It's my responsibility to look, as you so brilliantly say. It's like, look at all that stuff down there, because I now have it with me. It's my job to look at it, heal it, own it, let it go, and move on in an expanded way of living.
Exactly. And it's an experience. And it's an experience. It's not something that's happening to you, because that's where we get stuck in the victim state, the powerless.
Absolutely. 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 So there are many, many more wonderful things that can be said, but we don't want everybody to just go brain dead on overload.
No, right. And we have a part 2 coming up as well about addictions.
Yes, where we will, in a sense, continue the conversation not only about relationships, but about all the other kinds of things that turn out to be addictions. And in the meantime,
relationships is just one of them.
It's just one of them. I leave you with the idea that thinking is an addiction. You think, thinking? I remember when I worked at IBM, there were big signs on the wall that said, think. Thinking has been magnified as the most important thing we do. Experiencing our lives is far more important than thinking about our lives.
Thinking is intellectual and experiencing is more the limbic system. That's the heart center.
Yes, absolutely. So we hope everybody will make themselves aware of your beautiful work, the work we do. Please come to our website.
Carol, where can they find you? Where can they find you?
They can find us at carolhowe.com, and I would especially commend to you taking many, many decades of information, learning, and so on, and we've created a wonderful program called See How Life Works. We have about 16 hours of professionally produced video covering all the major topics, how we get into this in the first place, relationships, forgiveness, healing, guidance, choice, how all those things work. And we have wonderful animations are included. And over the years, with the help of other people who are like carpenters and so on, I designed and built some big teaching props that help people see visually what some of these metaphysical principles are. And they're copyrighted. There aren't anything like them anywhere. So it's hard to describe them except to say, like one of them is 16 feet long. I'm not talking about some little thing up on a whiteboard. I mean, these are three-dimensional things made out of building materials that help us see how our relationships mirror to us, our unfinished business. What happens when we resist instead of accept?
Right.
How our experience grows, you might say, vertically from our attitude rather than from past to future. It straightens out so many things. So please do come check it out.
Wonderful. And for everyone, you can find me on Instagram, Evette Rose with a digit 1. And remember, my name is spelled with Evette with an E. I'm from South Africa, not France. You can also find me on Facebook, Metaphysical Anatomy fan page. If you haven't had your copy of Metaphysical Anatomy, 679 medical conditions with self-sabotaging patterns, everything behind that. If you're a practitioner or just for your own personal life, you will love it. Have a look at my website, metaphysicalanatomy.com. and I have Finding Your Own Voice on Facebook as well. So join me there and the Healing Circle as well. So that's all from me for today. And Carol, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
It's more fun than anything. What can I say? So thank you to you and for our listeners and to all those who have helped us come to where we are today.
Absolutely. Let's connect. Thanks,
Right.
everyone. Appreciate everyone. And Carol, I appreciate you and everyone else. Continue to be the light that you are.
Absolutely. Ditto.